Good Shabbos, my holy sisters and brothers, and an early Hag Sameach. Shabbos is almost here. Passover begins tomorrow night. Those guys are fantastic. That's the Revivo project doing a Shabbos medley that began with Lecha Dodi, went into other songs. I want to hang out with those guys. They posted that video on YouTube 8 years ago. It has 14 million views. It's like 30 guys smoking hookahs, drinking wine, playing instruments, and just singing with all their heart and soul. That's a way to get in the mood. Let's light up the darkness. All right, let me turn that off. Okay, who's with us as we get it going on the eve of a 3-day Hag, Shabbos, followed by 2 days of Passover? It's been a lot of preparation going into this weekend. And we, as a group, have done a lot of preparation, working our way through all of Tractate Pesachim. We made our siyum yesterday, our completion on our journey through the fourth volume of the Talmud, the laws of Passover. So maybe this year there's a lot of things we'll notice about Passover that we'll understand at a deeper level. Pauline in Arkansas, Yehudit in South Carolina, Ann in Merced, California, Joyce in Philadelphia, Gwen in Michigan, Paula in the great Northwest, Angela in New York, Loretta saying Hag Sameach and good Shabbos from Pebble Beach. Hamza in Pakistan, welcome. Hamza, great to have you with us. Stephen in New Hampshire, Nancy in North Carolina, Joyce wishing us a whole bunch of nice emojis. Beautiful. Over there on the YouTube side, Jacob in Charlotte, Nancy, I think you got cut off. It says South something, maybe South Carolina. And Lindsay, I know, is in Cincinnati. Welcome, everybody. Great to be with you. Where are we holding? This is Shekalim, the 5th volume of the Talmud, and we're on Daf Vav, page 6. Shekalim has to do with the collection of the yearly half-shekel that was gathered from the Jewish population when the temple was standing to fund the daily offerings. There was a morning offering and an afternoon offering every day as mandated by the Torah, and the additional offerings of Shabbos, of Yom Tov, like the first 2 days of Passover and the last 2 days. Well, in Israel, the first day of Passover and the last day of Passover, the festival days of Sukkot and Shavuos, etc. We are page 6, as I mentioned. We're in chapter 2, and we're going to be doing Mishnahs 3 and 4 today. So we're a page ahead, but tomorrow, Shabbos, where we would normally have a show after Shabbat on Saturday night, that's when Passover starts. So we won't have a show Saturday night, and we won't have a show Sunday night because outside of Israel, the first 2 days are full-fledged festival days. Our next show after today will be Monday. Since we did a double episode earlier in the week, if we do a double page when we come back on Monday night, then we'll actually be caught up, right? We're ahead now. We'll need a double to make up for this 3-day Hag. I'm going to aim to do that. We'll either do that double page probably on Monday night, perhaps a little bit later in the week, depending. I can't take notes during Shabbos and the Hag, and I like to take notes when I'm preparing to teach the class. So we'll see what kind of material is on those 2 pages, if it's the kind I can do by, reading it and feeling comfortable enough to teach it, or maybe we'll do the double later in the week. Okay, let's get into it. There's some very interesting questions that are going to be asked today. Talking about, okay, we haven't had the temple in 2,000 years, and sometimes these laws of the yearly contribution can seem a little arcane, but actually they're going to touch on spiritual subjects and modern practical subjects in a pretty profound way, as we shall see. Okay, Mishnah number 3, here in chapter 2 of Tractate Shekalim, the 5th volume of the Talmud. With regard to one who gathers together small coins and said, "These are for my shekel," meaning his yearly half-shekel obligation, and subsequently discovered that the coins that he'd saved up amounted to more than his half-shekel obligation, right? Because he's using smaller coins. The half-shekel is a half-silver shekel. It's not the smallest denomination. As we saw, the smallest denomination is what was given as the premium to make sure that you in no way shortchange the temple. So let's say you were saving up small coins to get to that half-shekel value, and you discovered that you saved up more than you needed. So Beis Shammai, the followers of Shammai, say the leftover coins are placed in the collection horn. As we saw when they do these collections for the temple, it was called a horn. The collection box was called a horn because it was shaped like a horn, thin, narrow at the top, much wider at the bottom, to make sure that people, when they drop in their coin, there was nobody that would have that opportunity or even be tempted to reach in and take money from the collection box. So Beis Shammai say that the leftover coins that this person saved up beyond his obligation are placed in the collection horn that's designated for a free will offering. So as we saw, there were anybody can bring a free will offering at any time. Even a non-Jew could bring free will offerings. Usually those are offered as burnt offerings, elevation offerings, meaning that the whole animal goes up in smoke on the altar. But there were also communal free will offerings, which are burnt offerings. And those would be done like with this extra money that was gathered for the temple that wasn't needed neither for the daily obligatory offering of the nation nor for the upkeep of the temple. It couldn't be given away from the temple. It had to be used in the temple. So what would they do? When the altar was idle, they would bring these free will communal offerings that would go up. And so this is where that extra money would go for these communal free will offerings. And Beis Shammai say when you saved up more than you needed, since you were intending to use the money that you put into that collection box for your half shekel for the purpose of the daily offerings used by the temple, so whatever you saved more than you needed for your obligation should go toward these communal free will offerings. Beis Hillel disagree with Beis Shammai, and they say the leftover money is non-sacred property. It's not consecrated. The money that you put into your own little private box that you were saving up for your half shekel obligation, when you put in more than you needed, it doesn't become consecrated property. You don't have to give it to the temple. It's just more than you needed for this purpose, and it is non-sacred property according to Beis Hillel. However, if the person originally said, I am gathering together this money so that I will bring my shekel from these coins, and here the language that he uses is very precise and it's important. So that if a person said, I will bring my shekel from these coins, so they agree that the leftover money is non-sacred property. And here the concept is, if you sort of set aside by mistake something that you were going to use for a consecration, but you didn't intend to, in this case, more coins than you needed, but you didn't intend to use it for what it was going to be used for, then they agree, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai agree, that the leftover money is non-sacred property. If one who was obligated to bring a sin offering gathered together coins and said, these are for my sin offering, then if he had accumulated more than was needed, they agree that the leftover money must be designated as a free will offering. However, if he originally said that I will bring my sin offering from these, then they agree that the leftover money is non-sacred property, right? So it seems to be like, how are you thinking about it when you started saving up money, either for your annual half shekel obligation or for a sin offering? As we're going to see, there's different results, whether you're saving up for the half shekel or for the sin offering, but there's also different results about how you thought about it, right? Is it, the money I put in this jar is for my half shekel, or the money I put in this jar is for my sin offering, versus I will fund my half shekel. I will pay my half shekel from the money in this jar. Or I will pay for this sin offering that I'm obligated to bring from the money in this jar. So that's a different kind of intentionality that the person has. And we can say that, okay, he didn't intend that everything in the jar was going to be used for the half shekel, or everything in the jar was going to be used for his sin offering. Rabbi Shimon said, what is the difference between shekels and a sin offering? Why do Beis Hillel say that the leftover money is non-sacred property in the case of shekels, while with regard to a sin offering, they say that the leftover money is consecrated for a free will offering, right? So in that first case where he just said, I'm setting aside money for my shekel, or I'm setting aside money for my sin offering, on this, Beis Hillel produced a different result, even if his wording or his intention was the same. This money's for my shekel, or this money's for my sin offering. For the shekel, what he saves up beyond what he needs is not consecrated. But for the sin offering, what he saves up beyond what he needs is consecrated, even according to Beis Hillel. So Rabbi Shimon says, what's the difference between them? So he says, well, the issue is that the shekels have a fixed value. The shekel what do you owe each year? A half shekel. You know the exact amount. However, a sin offering has no fixed value, right? When you're bringing a sin offering, you're going to purchase an animal to bring, only when the temple is standing, of course. You're going to purchase an animal to bring as an offering in Jerusalem on the altar in the temple. What animal are you bringing, right? I mean, there's only certain animals that can be used, but even within the type of animal that can be used, there's going to be bigger ones and smaller ones, nicer looking ones and less nice looking ones. The price of livestock will fluctuate over time. So a sin offering, the animal used for a sin offering, has no fixed value. Says Reb Shimon, that's the difference. Since he doesn't know how much the sin offering is going to cost, when he says, I'm setting aside coins for my sin offering, later maybe he purchases a sin offering that costs less than the amount of money he had in the jar, but all the money in the jar was intended for purchasing a sin offering, and he might have purchased a much more expensive one, or the price of livestock might have gone up and he might have needed all the money. And that's why all the money in the jar is considered to be consecrated as a donation to the temple. Rabbi Yehuda says, even for shekels, there is no fixed value. You say that, okay, well, the shekel is the same value every year. Your obligation to donate a half shekel to the temple is the same amount of money every year. But says Rabbi Yehuda, no, shekels don't have a fixed value. For when the Jewish people ascended from the exile, they would contribute darics, which are Median coins worth 2 shekels by Torah law. They brought these coins with them and would give a half of one to fulfill their half shekel obligation. Later on, when the Median Empire was dissolved, they reverted to contributing with a sela, a silver coin of equal weight to the shekel mentioned in the Torah. And people would contribute a half sela for their half shekel requirement. And when the value of this currency changed later on, they reverted to contributing with a tiva, a different coin, which is worth a half shekel. So as we see over time, the value of that half shekel obligation actually changed. There was one sort of amount that they were giving. There was the original value, right, when the children of Israel were in the desert and the command was first given in the Torah, and then when the people were led by Joshua into the promised land, and then they were still using the Mishkan, the tabernacle, for several hundred years. Then Solomon built the temple, and there was that whole period, about 1,000 years. Then the first temple was destroyed. The people were exiled to Babylonia. They came back. Now there was a very small population of Jews in Israel, led by Ezra, with the task of rebuilding the second temple. And now they actually needed more money every year. I mean, they needed more money from every individual in order to fund daily offerings for the whole year. Then over time, as the population grew and the number of people that could fund, who were giving a half shekel once a year to fund the daily offerings of the whole year, once there was more people, they could reduce that sort of, not a premium, but that extra amount that they levied on the whole population, because there just wasn't enough of them to buy all the offerings. As the population grew, they didn't need to levy that extra amount. Moreover, they were using coins that were being minted by another empire. Its value was going up and down. So you can't say that half-shekel obligation had the same value or cost people the same amount every year. It changed also. So since the value of the half-shekel obligation changed over time, says Rabbi Yehuda, why would you distinguish from the fact that between money left over for the half-shekel obligation versus money that you saved up and you had left over for a sin offering obligation? Why are you going to make a distinction? Since the half-shekel obligation changes too, anything that you saved up beyond what you need should be consecrated in accordance with the opinion of Beis Shammai, unlike what Beis Hillel said. Some people wished to contribute only dinars, which are half the value of the tiva, i.e. 1/4 shekel in value, and the sages refused to accept it and required them to contribute at least the half shekel mentioned in the Torah. Nevertheless, it is clear that the obligation of contributing shekels does not have a fixed value. Rabbi Shimon said in response, even so, despite the fact that during different periods there were different amounts used to fulfill the obligation of the half shekel, in any particular period, everyone has equal standing. In any given year, every adult Jewish male in the population has to contribute the same amount of money. Okay, that amount of money might be different in one decade versus another decade, or one century versus another century, but in any given year, it's the same amount for everybody. Can we say the same for sin offerings? No, because people are going to buy different animals to satisfy their obligation to bring a sin offering, and that's a much greater variety of values even in the same year. So that's why it makes sense that money saved up beyond what is needed for the half shekel is considered non-consecrated, but money saved up beyond what is needed to purchase an animal for a sin offering is consecrated. That's the Mishnah. The Gemara. It is taught in the Mishnah, one who gathers together coins and says, these are for my shekel. If he finds that he has more than a half shekel, then according to the opinion of Beis Shammai, the remainder is designated for a free will offering, and according to Beis Hillel, the remainder is non-sacred property. Rabbi Yosei said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, with regard to what do they disagree? With regard to one who gathers coin by coin, adding small coins bit by bit until they amount to a large sum. It is assumed that he intended to contribute only a half shekel, but he did not pay attention to the fact that a larger sum had accumulated. So according to Beis Hillel, an item that was consecrated by mistake does not become consecrated, and thus the leftover money is non-sacred property. However, with regard to one who takes a stack of coins, he's got a whole bunch of coins sitting around, he digs into this, his coin jar, takes out a handful of coins, and he says, these are for my shekel. Everyone agrees, according to Rabbi Yosef in the name of Rabbi Elazar, everyone agrees that he must have intended to consecrate the entire sum, and therefore the leftover coins are designated as a free will offering. Hold on one second. Okay. And so everyone agrees that the leftover coins are designated as a free will offering. Now, Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Beva will say also in the name of Rabbi Elazar, no, you misunderstood what Rabbi Elazar said. What was he saying with regard to what do they disagree? When one gathers coin by coin. In that case, Beis Shammai maintain that the leftover money is for a free will offering, since they hold that an item consecrated by mistake is in fact consecrated. All the money that he accumulated becomes consecrated property and must be designated as a free will offering. However, with regard to one who takes a stack of coins and says, these are for my shekel, everyone agrees that the leftover coins are non-sacred property. Even Beis Shammai agree that he did not intend to consecrate a sum of money so far beyond the requirement of the half shekel ab initio to begin with. And so we have this idea of they're trying to get into the mind of the person who, picks one who saves coin by coin and another who just picks up a bunch of money? Is he saying, I will take my shekel from these? Or is he saying all of this is for my shekel? Since he didn't say, he just picked it up, right? Well, he says, and these are for my shekel. So how are we going to interpret that? Does he mean that everything here is meant to go to the temple and there should be enough for the shekel? Or does he mean I'll take my shekel from that? And they disagree on the outcome of that. We skip down a little bit. The Gemara discusses a different issue. When a person sets aside his shekel and he thought at that point that he is obligated to contribute it, and it turns out that he is not obligated to contribute it, as he had contributed it already. The shekel that he separated is not consecrated, just as other mistakenly consecrated items do not become consecrated. With regard to one who sets aside 2 shekels simultaneously, and he thought that he is obligated to contribute 2, one for the current year and one for the previous year, and it turns out that he is obligated to contribute only 1, as he had in fact contributed the previous year's shekel, what do you do with the second one that was mistakenly set aside? Now the Gemara is going to learn out the answer of what do you do when you mistakenly put aside 2 shekels where you only needed 1, from a similar situation involving a sin offering. Now, why is this relevant to us and practical? Because this can happen. In fact, I was talking to a friend at Arminian some weeks ago, and he said, he meant to donate $18 to some charity that he cared about, and by mistake, he donated $180, right? So now he definitely could write to them and say, hey, I'm sorry, I put the decimal point in the wrong place. I meant to give $18. Would you mind refunding the extra money? But he didn't do that. He said, you know what? Hashem, God, made me move the decimal point. Thank God I can afford to give $180. I didn't intend to give it to this charity, but now that it's happened, I'm going to let it stay with the charity. It must be that charity needs it more than I do. And let's see how that squares with what we're learning here. The Gemara answers, let us hear the halacha from this baraisa. If one set aside his sin offering, and at that point he thought he was liable as he had unwittingly sinned in such a manner requiring to bring a sin offering, right? What is a sin offering? So for example, by mistake, you violated Shabbos, right? Let's say that you turned on your phone, which you don't turn on screens, you don't deal with electronics on Shabbos, but you forgot that it was Shabbos. You didn't realize it was Shabbos, and that's why you turned it on. Now, we don't bring sin offerings today because the temple is not standing. There's no altar, no priests are serving there. We can't bring sin offerings. But when the temple is standing, for the unwitting violation of a negative prohibition, you become liable to bring a sin offering. If you do it intentionally, you can't bring a sin offering to atone for it. You can make an atonement, you can make teshuvah, but not through the vehicle of bringing a sin offering. That's there for the unwitting violation of certain prohibitions. Okay, so let's say he thought he was liable. He had made a mistake. He said, okay, I owe a sin offering. And he puts aside an animal for the sin offering. He purchases an animal, or he has his own flock, and he sets aside one animal to be his sin offering because he thought he was liable. And then it turns out that he was not liable to bring a sin offering. So that animal that he set aside, is it consecrated? Does it already belong to the temple, even though first he made a mistake when he committed the transgression. Now he made a mistake when he actually didn't make the transgression. He didn't make a mistake. He was right in the first place, but he mistakenly set aside the animal. So did that animal become consecrated or not? That's the question. And if one so that's the question, but here's the law is given. And it turns out that he was not liable, then indeed the animal is not consecrated. And this seems to follow Beis Hillel's understanding of things that we saw before, that if somebody mistakenly consecrates property, it is not consecrated. A different case, if one set aside 2 animals and thought at the time that he had unwittingly transgressed 2 prohibitions and was therefore liable to sacrifice 2 sin offerings, and it turns out that he was liable to sacrifice only 1, what do you do with the second animal? Sounds like, according to the first law, well, if you don't owe it, you don't owe it. So if you set it aside, it's not consecrated. But here it's a little different because he is liable to bring a sin offering. He just thought he was liable to bring 2. So it could be that either of the animals was set aside for the purpose of that first sin offering, that first transgression, which he did commit. So in that case, the animal must be left to graze. We've seen this before. He's not liable to bring that second sin offering, so he can't bring 2 sin offerings, but the animal did acquire some measure of holiness, so it is left to graze until that animal can't be brought on the altar. It's left to graze, nor can it be worked, right? He can't benefit from it. So it's left to graze until it develops a blemish, at which point it's unfit for the altar. It is sold at that point, and then the money that he receives for it, he'll donate to the temple for a communal free will offering. On the one hand, it is consecrated with the sanctity of a sin offering, but on the other hand, since the person who consecrated is not obligated another sin offering, it cannot be sacrificed. So too, these mistakenly set aside half shekels, in the case of one who set aside 2 half shekels, and in the end he was obligated only to contribute 1. He set aside 2, right? You only owe 1 half shekel each year, but he thought that last year he neglected to pay. And as we've seen, when they set out the horns to collect the shekels each year, there's 2 horns at every collection station, one for this year's shekel and one for last year in case you didn't pay it last year. So he thought he didn't pay last year, but then he realized, oh no, wait, I did pay last year. So he's now got these 2 half shekels. What does he do with them? So too, these mistakenly set aside half shekels, in the case of one who set aside 2, and in the end was obligated to contribute only 1, the extra half shekel is now designated for the special box at the temple where they put in money set aside for communal free will offerings, as opposed to the communal obligated daily offerings. The Gemara rejects this comparison between the case of the extra shekel and the case of the extra sin offerings. Here in the case of extra shekels, how can you say these are designated for a free will offering? The Mishnah distinguishes between the leftover money when collecting shekels, which is considered non-sacred property, and the leftover money when collecting for a sin offering, which is considered consecrated for a free will burnt offering. So the Gemara rejects that comparison, right? And as we saw, what is the reason? Because sin offerings vary so much in value, but the leftover shekels are always the same, at least in any given year. What is the law on this? One who set aside 2 half shekels because he thought he was obligated to contribute both, and then discovered that he was obligated to contribute only 1. If he set them aside one after the other, the last one is not sacred property. If he set them aside simultaneously, one of them is his half shekel and the other one is termed the leftover money of the half shekel in accordance with the conclusion of the Gemara, right? So it's a difference whether he picks them up both at once, then that extra one that he's not obligated in nevertheless picks up some measure of holiness. Whereas if he picks one, this is for my obligation, and this is another one for my last year's obligation, that's mistakenly consecrated and doesn't become consecrated. We skip down a little more. So in the Mishnah, it said that the temple treasurers refused to accept it from them. They refused to accept single dinars in place of the half shekel. From where did the sages derive this? This was in the earlier Second Temple period, right, when Ezra led the people back from Babylonia, and there was very few of them. And then over time, the population grew, and the amount of the half shekel obligation, which was being measured in other kinds of money issued by the Persian Empire, its value fluctuated a little bit from year to year. What were they going to ask for? In the beginning, they needed more than the half shekel because there just wasn't enough people to fund daily offerings for the whole year. Later, they were able to accept less less because there was a greater population. At a certain point, they had more than enough money to fund the daily offerings for the year, but they realized that in dropping the value of what was needed from every adult Jewish male, it had dropped below what could be evaluated as the equivalent value of the biblical half shekel. And that they were not going to take because, the Torah says everyone has to give the half shekel. So once they figured out what the biblical half shekel was worth, they said, we're not going to accept a value below that. From where is that derived? From Nehemiah 10:33. Nehemiah 10:33, we made ordinances for us to charge ourselves yearly with the third part of a shekel for the service of the house of our God. The third of a shekel cited in this verse is 1/3 of a darik, the prevalent coin of the time. Until that time, the custom was to contribute a half of the prevalent coin of the time. There was no more the shekel that they used at the time the Torah was given. So what they said is, okay, well, what is the prevalent currency? Let's say like today, the prevalent currency is the dollar, certainly in the United States. And that's where the 50-cent piece could become important. It's going to be half of the prevalent currency. But the sages of that generation were concerned that over time, the value of the prevalent coin would be reduced to the extent that people would no longer be contributing the value of the Torah half shekel. And the verse reports that they therefore set a minimum for the collection, which is the precedent for the sages of the Mishnah not accepting the request to lower the fixed amount to a dinar. Once the verse is mentioned, the Gemara discusses other laws that are derived from it. Rabbi Hilkiah said in the name of Rabbi Acha, this verse is about the mitzvah of charity. This idea of the third of the dinar. The third of the shekel. Now the shekel meaning the prevalent currency of the realm as opposed to the Torah shekel. So Rabbi Acha interprets this as actually having to do with charity. The term shlishit, 1/3, shelishit, used in this verse contains superfluous letters, as it could have been written shalish and maintained its meaning. From here, one may derive that a person must donate his shekel 3 times a year, meaning that he must give a shekel to charity 3 times a year. Now, we have a nice note on this from Rav Steinsaltz. Some explain this passage not as referring to charity, but as the continuation of the previous discussion with regard to the half shekel. And this explanation is based on the opinion of early authorities who maintain that the value of a darik is a shekel and a half. And accordingly, when the Mishnah says they used to contribute dariks, it means that at the time of Ezra, each person gave a whole darik for his half shekel obligation, which is 3 half shekels by Torah law. And when the Gemara says the words from here, it is bringing a source for this obligation from the following verse, the one that we read. Rabbi Hilkiah explained that this verse means that the Jewish people divided their annual contributions to the temple into 3 installments. They gave 1/3 of a darik each time. And that made sense because during that period where they just needed more from every individual, okay, so it wouldn't be so burdensome. They didn't require it all at once, which for the very poor people would be very difficult. They said, okay, you can give it in 3 installments over the course of the year. Then comes the question, okay, now that they're talking about this money that was given, they're now going to give kind of spiritual, exegetical interpretations of why God asked or commanded, right? Why God commanded the Jewish people through his prophet Moses to give a half shekel. Why that specific amount was the annual levy on the adult Jewish male? It is written, this they shall give everyone who passes among them that are numbered, half a shekel after the shekel of the sanctuary. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nehemiah disagree with the reason for the half shekel commandment. One said, because they sinned with the golden calf. At the midpoint of the day, they should have, because they sinned with the golden calf at the midpoint of the day, they should give a half shekel as a remembrance, meaning you committed the sin of the golden calf at the midpoint of the day, the half shekel should remind you, no matter how holy or, upright you think you are, you're the descendant, you're part of a nation that committed a grievous sin, and you should remember, and they did that, right? I mean, so soon after the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, and it should humble you, and you should remember that, unless you're really taking care to maintain an upright, to stay on the right road, you could easily fall off, just as your ancestors did. And one said, because they sinned at the 6th hour of the day, they should give a half shekel, whose sum is equal to 6 garmisin, a small coin that was prevalent in that period. Rabbi Yehoshua of the house of Rabbi Nehemiah said, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, because the Jewish people transgressed the 10 commandments at the time of the golden calf, each one of them shall give 10 gera, which equals a half shekel, as is written elsewhere. And the Gemara cites an additional reason for the obligation to give a half shekel. Rabbi Berechiah and Rabbi Levi said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, since the sons of Jacob sold Joseph, their brother, the firstborn of Rachel, for 20 silver dinars, the nation was commanded that each of them must redeem his firstborn son with 20 silver dinar, which is 5 selah, as there are 4 dinar in a selah. And the Gemara returns. In other words, if you work that out, there was a note on that. Since 10 brothers were involved in the sale, right? There were 12 brothers, but Joseph's brother Benjamin was not involved. So there were 10 brothers involved in the sale of Joseph, and 20 dinar were divided among them. Each one received 2 dinar, which is the equivalent of a tiva, and later would lead to this half shekel obligation. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3. Mishnah number 4. We're at the top of the B side of page 6. The leftover money from what was set aside for shekels is non-sacred property, in accordance with the opinion of Beis Hillel in the previous Mishnah. The Mishnah now discusses similar cases for other sacred items. With regard to the leftover money from what one set aside to purchase the 10th of an ephah of fine flour, so this is the meal offering. You could bring animals as an offering. You could also bring a grain offering, which for certain kinds of offerings, this was the requirement of a poor person who couldn't afford to bring birds or a full-fledged lamb or goat. So from what one set aside to purchase the 10th of an ephah of fine flour for a meal offering, and the leftover money from what one set aside to purchase offerings that he's obligated to bring, such as the pairs of birds of a zav, or the pairs of birds of a zava, and the pairs of birds of a woman after childbirth, or sin offerings, or guilt offerings. In these cases, its leftover money should be used for free will offerings that are offered, as we mentioned before, when the altar is sitting idle, communal free will offerings. And this is the principle. Whatever money is designated for a sin offering or for a guilt offering, if one saved up more than he needed, its leftover money must be used for a free will offering. The leftover money from what was set aside for a burnt offering that he owes due to a vow or a volunteering must be used for another burnt offering that he will bring in the future. Not that he puts it aside for the communal burnt offerings, he sets it aside for himself to bring a burnt offering in the future. The leftover, and remember that the offerings are sort of ranked in their degree of holiness, and the burnt offering is the highest degree. So if you set aside money for that, you don't want to use the leftover for an offering of a lesser degree of sanctity. The leftover money from what one set aside to purchase fine flour for a meal offering must be used for another meal offering. The leftover money of what one set aside for a peace offering must be used for another peace offering. The leftover money that one set aside to purchase the Pesach, the Paschal lamb that we eat at Passover, is not used for another Paschal lamb, such on the following year. Rather, it is used for purchasing a peace offering. As we've seen, as we learned during our journey through Tractate Pesachim, when the temple was standing and we would bring the Paschal lamb as an offering at Passover, there was often a large group of people registered to it. Each would eat a very small piece of the Paschal lamb, but they would bring additional peace offerings so that they could get, a belly full of meat at the festive meal on Passover. Those were the festival peace offerings. So whatever you have in excess of your needs for the Paschal lamb, you should use for peace offerings. The leftover money from what one is set aside to purchase sacrifices for a number of Nazarites, people who take a vow not to benefit from wine or anything of the grapevine and don't cut their hair during the period of their Nazirus. And then at the end, they bring certain sacrifices. Sometimes people take that vow and they're very poor. They can't afford to bring the sacrifices that they would bring at the end of that period, but other people will buy it for them. So if you set aside money for the purpose of funding the sacrifices of a group of Nazarites, it must be used to purchase sacrifices for other Nazarites. And the leftover money from what a single Nazarite set aside for his own offering is used for a free will offering. That's the fourth Mishnah. Here's the Gemara. Rabbi Yosei said, while I was still there in Babylonia, right? So Rabbi Yosei, remember this Tractate Shekalim is taken from the Jerusalem Talmud. Rabbi Yosei is operating in the Holy Land, but he went to visit the sages in the Babylonian Jewish community. So while I was still there in Babylonia, I heard the voice of Rav Yehuda ask his teacher Shmuel, if one set aside his shekel, and he died before he contributed to the temple treasurer, what is to be done with this money? And Shmuel said to him, it must be allocated for communal free will offerings. And Rabbi Yosei asked, if a high priest, the Kohen Gadol, set aside money to purchase fine flour for his meal offering, and then discovered that he had separated more money than was necessary, what should be done with the leftover money from his tenth of an ephah? And Shmuel answered that this is a matter of dispute, as Rabbi Yochanan said that he must cast it into the Dead Sea and dispose of it there, and Rabbi Elazar said it must be allocated for communal free will offerings. What is the difference between the meal offering of the high priest and the meal offering of anyone else? Well, other people can bring a meal offering on any given day. The high priest is obligated to bring a meal offering every day. If he set aside more money than was needed for that daily meal offering, he can't apply it to tomorrow's meal offering because tomorrow has its own obligation. He's the high priest. It can't go to some other offering that's going to be of lower sanctity than the offering of the high priest. So there's really nothing they can do with it. And this is a very rare situation because of the way the law works. The money, that extra money that isn't needed for the high priest's meal offering, it can't be used for anything. It's consecrated. There's no offering that it can be used to purchase. So what do they do with it? They actually toss the money in the Dead Sea. According to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar said it's used for free will offerings. Okay, and so they're trying to understand, well, who's right here? Is it Rabbi Elazar or Rabbi Yochanan? So the Gemara comments, the Mishnah disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan, as it taught the leftover money from the shekel is non-sacred property. However, with regard to the leftover money from the tenth of an ephah of grain, the leftover money from the pairs of birds of Azav and the pairs of birds of Azava, the leftover money from the pairs of birds of a woman after childbirth and the sin offerings and guilt offerings, all of this leftover money must be used for free will offerings. It doesn't seem to make a distinction for the meal offering. And the Gemara says, well, what does Rabbi Yochanan do with this Mishnah, which seems to contradict his idea that the money should be tossed in the Dead Sea? And the Gemara answers, well, Rabbi Yochanan explains that the Mishnah is not referring to the meal offering of the high priest. It's referring to the meal offering of a regular person among the Jewish people. Everyone agrees that the leftover money of this type of meal offering is used for free will offerings. However, the leftover money of a high priest's meal offering is cast into the Dead Sea, and that is indeed the law. The halakha follows Rabbi Yochanan. So in that rare situation that the priest set aside too much money for his own daily meal offering, that money is, the leftovers, cast into the Dead Sea. I am almost done, so if you've got questions or comments, get them in now. Here. Okay, Rabbi Abba Bar Ba raised another objection on the source of the Babylonian sages. Okay, Rabbi Abba Bar Ba asks, why does the leftover money of a Paschal lamb, of the Korban Pesach, go to a peace offering? Why not a free will burnt offering like the leftover money of so many of these other offerings? And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Avon said, an item that is designated for eating, like the Paschal lamb, which is eaten by its owners, may be transformed into another item that is designated for eating, like the peace offering. However, an item that is designated for eating, like the Paschal lamb, may not be transformed into another item that is not designated for eating, like the burnt offering, which goes up in its entirety on the altar. Rabbi Yosef bar Rabbi Bun said another answer. The status of offerings of minor sanctity may be transformed and designated as other sacrifices of minor sanctity, but they may not be transformed into offerings of the most sacred order, like a burnt offering. So it's interesting, like we think of Passover as like such a holy time, the holiest time of the year. I mean, it's the national holiday, it's the origin tale of the Jewish people, as it were, celebrating when God pulled us out of slavery. And we have such an elaborate ritual of what we do at Passover. And we mourn that the temple was destroyed 2,000 years ago, and we can't bring the Paschal lamb as the centerpiece of the Passover Seder. But we should remember that the Paschal lamb, the Korban Pesach, that offering as an offering is actually considered, it's sacred, but it's considered of a minor sacredness. Whereas a burnt offering, which could be brought by anybody, Jew or non-Jew, but it's not eaten, it's offered on the altar in its entirety, and its smoke goes up to heaven as a pleasing aroma to God. It's a pleasing aroma when it's commanded, but he said this is the law of the burnt offering. When people bring it, it pleases God, right? And we can learn from that, of course, we want to observe Passover and do it correctly, and that pleases God. But, when you go above and beyond to perform a mitzvah, it's even more. It's an even more sacred thing that you have done, as we learn from the law of the burnt offering. Okay, let us look. Now, that doesn't mean when you go above and beyond and just do stuff that you make up, right? But when you go above and beyond to perform a commandment, that's when you really, stimulate heaven and give a lot of pleasure to the Holy One. So Gwen asks, how much is a half-shekel worth today? I don't know. I don't know how much it's worth today. However, on this idea that the sages, over time, I was like what, the money changed, different empires conquered the Holy Land, and they were going to bring, a different kind of coin than was available during Torah times when the commandment was given. And so they said, the prevalent money, right? So we no longer have an obligation to bring the half shekel because there's no daily offerings in the temple to be funded. But on Purim, right? Because this whole thing, Tractate Shekalim, is taking place in Adar. As we learn, in the month of Adar, on the first they announce that the half shekels are due, and on the 15th, which is the day after Purim, they're collecting them, right? They're giving them. So people set aside the money before the 15th. So today, we've seen that it's a commandment with respect to Purim to give money to the poor, right? To give gifts to your friends, but also especially to give money to charity, particularly charities that feed people. So, sort of traditional Jews will give a lot of money to charity to feed people. But in addition to what, however much they can afford to give, let's say a person is set aside in his mind, he's going to give it $300 to feed people. But in addition to the $300, a pious person will go out of his way to secure $half, right? To secure $half, specifically 50-cent pieces that he can put into collection boxes before Purim. It's a beautiful thing. On Erev Purim, so that afternoon before Purim starts that night, in traditional synagogues, they put out collection boxes for various charities, usually having to do with feeding people or educating people. And, very pious people will make sure they've gone to the bank and secured 50-cent pieces in honor of this Torah obligation of the annual half-shekel. We're not obligated to bring the half-shekel anymore because the temple's not standing, but as a way of remembering this law in the Torah, they will get 50-cent pieces and put them into the collection boxes on the afternoon before Purim. Okay, and Paula says, was there a set amount for a sin offering when the temple was open? So there, it's not a money amount. It's to bring an animal, right? And if there's the ideal way to bring it, and if you're too poor to afford, the from the flocks, meaning a sheep or a goat, then you could bring birds. And if you're too poor for the birds, you could bring a meal offering. So there was, and that was very affordable, right? To bring some grain that would get, fried and prepared in a certain way. So if you're asking, just as a voluntary measure, thinking that when you've done a sin, that we can't bring these offerings, but you might want to set aside some money for charity as part of your teshuvah. I don't know what that money would be. I can't, say any number for that. It's not related to the half-shekel. The half-shekel is about that yearly obligation, and we give it to charity, as Purim approaches. But in terms of if we feel like we've transgressed something, we'd like to give money to charity, there's no amount for that. But it's a good idea to make giving money to charity part of your personal atonement when you think that you could do better, when you realize you've made a transgression. But the most important thing in atonement, right, is understanding what you did, why you did it, and organizing yourself so that you won't do it again. Okay, Nina is super busy. She left me a note that she can't monitor questions anymore because, she's prepping for Passover. So let me see if I can scan quickly if there are any other questions. There's a bunch of stuff in Arabic that I don't know what it says, and I'm not going to be able to respond to that. So I'm not seeing other questions over there on Facebook, and on YouTube I'm not seeing questions either. Okay, we've all got a lot to do to get ready for Passover. So, my friends, you should have such a sweet, joyful, meaningful, liberating Passover. And remember, one of the best ways to make Passover meaningful, if you celebrate Passover, is that when you're reading the Haggadah, you should have in mind before you get to the Seder, if there's some behavior of your own that you shouldn't do that, but you do it anyway, well, that's like something you're enslaved to. And if you if you cry out to God to help you break free from that, then God will help you. Right? And it's very similar to 12-step programs where people say, they got addicted to some substance or some behavior, and they weren't able to break free of that addiction. So they appeal to a higher power. They appeal to God. And God is going to help them be strong enough to conquer that and to get organized in conquering that. And so when you read the Haggadah at Seder, you don't have to share with other people what it is you're trying to break free of. It could be as simple as you're too passive or you're too aggressive. You want to do better with that behavior. But every time you read about Pharaoh in the Haggadah and being enslaved to Pharaoh, you can have in mind that you want to break free of your own enslavement. And you're asking God to help you. And that's going to make the Seder much more personally meaningful. And God will give you the strength that you need. Just by asking, you're already halfway there. Then you really read Passover that way as the year that you're going to be liberated from that behavior. And then when we count the Omer, we make a daily count from the second night of Passover all the way 50 days until Shavuos, the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai. It's like you've got 50 days to check in each day and report to God, as it were, and how you're doing and breaking free of that behavior. And in that very kind of humble and organized manner, you will succeed in breaking free of that destructive enslavement as a behavior. In the meantime, have a great Shabbos and Hag Sameach. All the best.